Hey, what's up, Santi here, and today I'm really excited to finally start talking about language learning, which has been a passion of mine, and right now is a bit of a big obsession, which is why I want to start documenting a bit of the journey and the things that I learned through this process. Right now, I'm particularly very invested in like, how do you even start, learning a language? And this is because I started learning Greek, simultaneously with learning Italian, which I've been doing for a bit longer. I would say I'm like a beginner intermediate in Italian, but with Greek I'm complete beginner. I feel pretty lost, and I've done tons of research of what are the best ways to get started, and these are some of the things that I want to cover in other videos. So if you do have questions regarding your particular journey in language learning, do let me know. I love to make more dedicated videos about different topics. And yeah, today I want to talk about the lessons that I've learned from failing at several languages. Just to give you a bit of an overview, the three languages that I feel I failed at learning are Latin, Esperanto, and Toki-Pona. If you don't know what Esperanto and Toki-Pona are, I'm gonna give you a quick overview in a second. But yeah, before that, so that you know where I'm coming from, I live and I was born here in Ecuador, South America. So that means that Spanish is my first language, and English has been, like a second language that I've acquired through school and also through a lot of watching films and stuff like that. Like I do feel very confident in my ability to learn languages because I know that I was able to learn English through my passion of not just learning English, but through my other hobbies that led me towards wanting to know English way better. Because whenever I searched something when I was younger, for instance, card magic, street magic is a hobby of mine that I've been doing since I was like 14. And whenever I wanted to look at tutorials, they were all in English. So English was kind of like the tool through which I learned other things. And now in hindsight, I realize that my passion for those hobbies was the biggest reason why I managed to learn English, because English was the tool through which I learned the hobbies and the fun things that I wanted to learn, right? So we're probably gonna get more in the depths of like that, like those lessons in another video. And if you want to learn more about like, like my English journey, English language learning, I can't speak English obviously, but my English learning journey, language learning journey, I can make another video about that. But yeah, with that said, let's get more into this topic of like what have been my failures and what have I learned from it, right? So the very first failure that I had is Latin, okay? And I actually have a tattoo right here. This is Latin. Like this is around the time when I started learning Latin, when I was like 20, I think. I'm 26 now. And well, I think I already had a couple of failed attempts at learning when I was like 18. Latin has been a language that I keep revisiting, keep trying to learn it, and I think I've always had the missing piece to managing to learn the language, which is what we're going to cover in this video, right? But first, a bit of the overview. So Latin is one of the first failures. The next one is Esperanto. Okay, so Esperanto, again, if you're not familiar, is a constructed language. I might make another video in the future about Esperanto if you're really interested, but it's kind of like a constructed language that was meant to become an auxiliary language for people of all countries. Pretty much what English is now, but trying to make it like, the language of the world, the second language of the world. I was pretty interested in Esperanto. I actually did like 200 days of Duolingo, and it didn't really lead me anywhere. Like I feel like I learned some Esperanto, and if I decided to like get back to it, I still would feel like maybe like I wouldn't be starting from zero. I feel like I could push through that barrier of like becoming like a beginner to something slightly more intermediate. But it is a failure because I never managed to get to that intermediate level in Esperanto, to be honest. And there's tons of lessons to learn from there. Then the third language that I believe I failed at acquiring, and this one I'm a bit more embarrassed because it's meant to be a super easy language, and this one is Toki-Pona, right? So Toki-Pona, in case you're not familiar, similarly to Esperanto, it is a constructed language. However, this one is meant to be a very minimalist language, and so it has something like 120 words approximately. It varies because there's a revisited version, there's a couple of added words, but yeah, overall it's a very small language, and you're meant to be able to express yourself with fewer words and just like compound different words to create different meanings. And this was actually something that I was documenting my process on. I do have a podcast that I haven't continued on Toki-Pona and on my language journey towards that. But that was my third failure. Like these three languages I failed at. And particularly Latin, I feel like I'm gonna be able to revisit it in the future. However, Esperanto and Toki-Pona, I'm not so sure if I will, And well, the main thing that I do realize now through learning both Italian and Greek is that immersion is everything. Like that is the technique to go, you know, like, and if you've already been digging deep into like better techniques to learn, you probably heard of Stephen Krashen, which is like the master of like, you know, figuring out the best way to acquire a language. You probably already heard about this. If you haven't, I can definitely make a dedicated video on immersion and language acquisition and comprehensible input, all these fancy terms that pretty much mean that we learn languages through understanding messages. This means that whenever you are exposed to a language in a massive amount, like in an extensive amount, you're gonna be able to get this information if it's somewhat comprehensible. Obviously, when you're a complete beginner, it's hard to make it comprehensible, but there's definitely ways in which you can make this language understandable, right? Even if it's something you still don't understand at all. And that is something that I've managed to be able to do in Greek, that I'm learning right now way better than I was able to do in these other languages. And that is because the technique that I'm applying right now in Greek is rewatching films. Particularly, I love animation. Like, I grew up with like all of Disney and Pixar, and I just love these films. And I think the very first day that I started learning Greek, I actually decided to rewatch Hercules, the animated version from 1999. And I know that film pretty well. I love that film. And I watched it in Greek. You know, first day, not knowing any Greek, I managed to just watch that in Greek without understanding almost anything. But because I knew the context, because I knew the film, and because there's tons of imagery, it was somewhat comprehensible, at least from the sides of images and memory. So all the language, the Greek that was completely foreign to me, that I didn't understand, was somewhat comprehensible. So I could like start extracting a couple of words here and there, and out of the context I could be like, oh, okay, when you say signomi, it means like excuse me or sorry, you know, like particular words here and there. And with that, I've also been complementing it with a couple of other apps in Greek. But particularly this method of immersion, of listening to a lot of the language, even though you don't fully feel confident with it, even though you might feel a bit dumb, it is very uncomfortable at the beginning. That's what I'm realizing. And I'm glad I'm learning something like Greek, which is very foreign to me, because I didn't really feel this dumb when I started learning Italian, just because it's way closer to Spanish and even to English. Like, you know, it's like English has tons of influence from Latin, even though it's not a Romance language. Still, Latin is not that distant from English, and from Spanish is actually pretty close. So now, through the process of learning Greek from scratch, I do realize a bit more in hindsight why I was unable, or at least at this given point in my life, why I really struggled to learn Latin, Esperanto, and Toki-Pona. And that is because these languages, well, two of them are constructed languages, meaning made-up languages, and the other one, you could argue, is a dead language, even though still people speak it, and particularly academics or some people that just love Latin still speak it. So it's not dead in the sense that no one speaks it anymore, but rather there's no country right now that speaks Latin, and you know, and that's not a bad thing. Like, tons of people say like, oh no, Latin is not dead. Technically is, you know, but that's fine. You know, I always used to take offense when I started like talking to people like, oh, I'm learning Latin and it's really cool. They were like, isn't that dead? And I was like, no, it's not dead. But either way, I digress. So the main reason why I believe I failed at these three languages was because I was unable to fully immerse myself in those languages, because of the lack of content that exists in those languages. For instance, in Latin is a bit different, because you could read in Latin. There's actually quite a lot of material that could be read in Latin, right? And well, there's a really good book about that called Familia Romana, which is really, really good, that I actually was doing. But what failed for me in Latin is one of the other very important parts of this whole, you know, acquisition of languages, which is not just to make something comprehensible, but rather, what is the word? Oh, I forgot the word. I got it. It's compelling. So not just comprehensible, but also compelling. Okay. And by compelling, it just means that the content that you're consuming in the language is interesting to you. The more interesting, the better, right? And actually, you know, I've been digging tons in like different concepts and different YouTubers and different like writers, navigating like the differences between techniques and methods of language learning. I'm actually a huge fan of Matt versus Japan. If you've seen his YouTube channel, he's a great guy. He gives incredible advice. And one of the main things he says is that for some people, it might be easier, or it might be better for them to actually, you know, go headfirst into content that is, even if it's not completely understandable, that is very compelling, right? So like some people have a higher threshold for, you know, like letting things be ambiguous and just not being able to understand the message very well, as long as the content is interesting, right? And then there's other people that maybe don't care too much about like the content being interesting as long as they understand some of it, right? So this could be maybe like kids made for shows. However, there are exceptions where like it's just a bit too abstract and too hard to understand, or guided readers material, which is kind of like material and content made in the target language that you're trying to learn, but made for beginners, made for people that are learning this language as a second language, that are trying to learn that language through material that is way more understandable. And I realized that for me, I do prefer to have whatever I'm consuming in the language be interesting, right? I'm trying to accustom myself. It's not particularly comfortable, but I do prefer to engage with material that is very interesting to me, even if I don't understand most of it. Because, for instance, like for me, it's super easy to just rewatch all animated films, right? Like, or any type of film that I love watching. Like in English, I already watch the same film. Like, for instance, Tarzan, the animated version, I probably watched like 10 times. Spider-Man, the whole trilogy, the original trilogy, and even like the next ones, apart from the Tom Holland one, I've watched like 10 times each film. Like it's quite sick. But because I love this film so much, I am able to rewatch them in a language I still don't know, in this case Greek, and enjoy it, even though I don't understand the language that well yet. Still very, very much an enjoyable experience, and I prefer that over material that is kind of like made, dumbed down for learners, but it is just not interesting to me. And that is the biggest failure that I've faced with the other languages that I was learning. There's not enough films. Yeah, I'm gonna say films dubbed to Latin. Again, there is reading material, but at least films, which is where I like to start. There's not enough dubs in Latin. And then Tokipona and Esperanto, it's hard to really find good dubs of films as well, or just in general, like, content, in all these three languages. It's hard. Like for me, I really like watching YouTube videos, and I really like listening to podcasts, and I really like watching films, and these three languages have that in common, which is that it's hard to find the content that I want to find dubbed or made in that language, like content that I find interesting. In Esperanto, there's actually a YouTuber, Evil Deer, I think is his name, something like that. Yeah, he's pretty cool, and I really appreciate what he's doing, because he's making content, he's making YouTube videos in Esperanto, and I think that's like the best thing you can do for like the Esperanto community, right? Or for whichever language you're trying to spread, make content in that language, because that is perhaps not the only way, but it's definitely the best way in which we acquire language. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that just because there isn't enough content made in perhaps a constructed language or an ancient language, doesn't mean you can't learn it. It just means that personally, I believe it's going to be harder, because I do believe in the input hypothesis that immersion is perhaps the best way, like the ultimate way to learn a language. And we know this because, and this gets into tons of like other discussions about like, can we learn a language as good as a baby can? And I would say, or at least based on what I've learned, is that we can do it in that way. Like it is possible to immerse ourselves in a language similarly to what a baby does. However, a baby doesn't have an option. A baby's not gonna give up English or Spanish or whatever their native language is, be like, yeah, I'm just bad at languages, I'm just not gonna learn it. Like a baby doesn't do that, And that is the biggest difference between babies and adults. Again, this is another topic that I'd love to expand more in depth in another video. There's just so many tangents, I'm trying to stay in topic. But yeah, I do believe that because babies like learn languages through complete immersion, we gotta understand that there's something in our brain, a mechanism, a type of machine that is able to decode messages, is able to decode things you don't understand into meaning, right? And that is what we're doing when we are learning a new language. And we do that through a lot of exposure, like tons and tons of exposure through listening, even through reading. At this stage right now with Greek, I'm trying to do most of what I'm doing through listening. However, reading is kind of like another very useful thing that you can do, which is also input. However, there's tons of theories that say that perhaps similarly to what kids do, kids learn a language, learn to speak it, and then when they kind of know it, like they can speak pretty decently. When they're 5, 6, 7, then they go to school and then they start learning how to read and write, particularly to read, right? So if we imitate that process, which is kind of like the natural process, then that means that we probably should hold off reading until we are a bit more fluent. I still haven't made up my mind on like that, but obviously because I'm not a baby, I'm also trying to read in Greek and learning the alphabet and stuff like that. And in Italian, again, I'm in like a medium, beginner intermediate stage in Italian. So yeah, in there I feel like I'm okay with reading. However, I still try to get most of my learning through listening. But yeah, I digress. To kind of like make my point clearer, what I'm gonna try to do from now, from now on, is really give myself time to give immersion a try, to properly try if immersion can help me acquire something as difficult and as I have tons of uncertainty if I'm even gonna be able to learn Greek, or if it's gonna be added to my failure list. But because there is a lot of content still in Greek that I can see, like tons of films are dubbed to Greek, that's a huge advantage for me. I'm gonna try this immersion technique. I have a couple of other techniques that I want to give a try, but I'm sticking with immersion as the core of what I'm doing. And I want to see if that has been the biggest difference and the biggest reason why I haven't been able to acquire the other 3 languages that just are harder to find tons of content, compelling, interesting content in, Again, if your language doesn't have enough content, or if it's an ancient language, I still think it's possible, but you might have to apply another technique. And I do believe that immersion is the best way, and particularly the best way for me. That's what I've been doing right now with Italian, and I feel it's been going pretty well. So I do believe in immersion. I do believe in like listening to a lot of that content. The more interesting, the better. If you can make it somehow comprehensible through images or through having watched a particular show or a particular film before, that is going to help you understand things better. And yeah, we'll see where this takes me with Greek, and hopefully one day I might be able to revisit Latin. I know right now I don't want to revisit Latin because it might involve a bit of a different method, and also because I'm still learning Italian and I'm still kind of trying to get to that intermediate level. I was at first learning Latin and Italian at the same time, and it just got so confusing that I decided to stick with Italian, and now I just incorporated Greek, okay? So with that said, let me know if any of these topics are interested to you. I mentioned tons of ideas of future videos that I could do, so if any of that resonated with you and you would like to learn more about either like my English language learning journey, or perhaps like more about this idea of immersion and techniques on how to apply it, let me know in the comments. I'm very interested to expand on more of these topics, because as you can see, I'm rushing through it and I'm having tons of tangents because I want to talk about it all at once, but I'm gonna try to keep it a bit more concise video by video. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next time. Bye.